Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? The storm had been building all afternoon, rumbling like a distant growl of discontent as the sky thickened with bruised clouds. By twilight it had broken with a vengeance, sheets of rain hammering the hedgerows and turning the winding country lanes into rivers of mud and shadow. The headlamps of the little Morris car cut two fragile beams through the downpour, but they seemed no match for the night. Tommy Beresford hunched over the wheel, peering through the smeared windscreen. "Dashed luck," he muttered. "The one evening I agree to your romantic whim about a country drive, and the heavens decide to drown us." Tuppence, sitting beside him with her scarf tucked firmly under her chin, gave a laugh that was equal parts amusement and exasperation. "My dear Tommy, you make it sound as though I control the weather. And besides, if you had listened to me about taking the train instead—" Her words were swallowed by a violent crack of thunder that seemed to split the very air. The car gave a protesting cough, jolted once and rolled to a stop. The engine sputtered, wheezed and died. Tommy gave it a futile twist of the key. Nothing. "Well," he sighed, leaning back, "we appear to have joined the ranks of stranded motorists. I suppose you'll say I ought to have brought my toolkit." "Not at all," Tuppence replied briskly, peering out into the curtain of rain. "But I will say that unless you propose to push the car all the way back to London, we'd better find shelter." Her sharp eyes caught a darker bulk against the trees ahead, a looming silhouette that seemed to grow out of the storm. "Look there, lights in that house, a very large house if I'm not mistaken." Tommy followed her gaze. Through the shifting veil of rain they could just make out the high chimneys and steep gables of a manor house, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. "Well," he said, "if it's haunted, at least we'll be in out of the wet." They abandoned the car at the roadside, pulling their coats tight as the rain plastered hair to their faces. The gravel drive was half washed away, and the great iron gate stood open as though waiting. As they approached, the building revealed itself fully. Greystone Manor, a vast and weathered house of grey stone, its facade scarred with ivy and time. A carved crest loomed above the door, half erased by centuries. Tuppence shivered, but not from the cold. "It looks positively Gothic," she murmured. The heavy door opened before they could knock more than once. A butler, lean as a crow and no less solemn, surveyed them with a look that managed to combine disdain and resignation. "Yes?" "Our car," Tommy explained, water dripping from his hat brim. "It's given up the ghost. Might we beg shelter until the storm eases?" The butler's lips compressed. He glanced over his shoulder into the hall, then back at them. "Her ladyship will decide." He led them into a vast entrance hall where shadows pooled among carved beams and ancestral portraits glared down from their gilded frames. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and polish, and the rain drummed like impatient fingers against the leaded windows. At the far end of the hall, a figure waited. Lady Havisham, mistress of Greystone, was tall and angular, draped in a gown of deep violet. Her face, lined yet still proud, carried the severity of command. "Travellers," she said, her voice cool as the stone underfoot. "Yes," Tuppence answered quickly, stepping forward. "Our car broke down on the lane. We had hoped that you might shelter here." Lady Havisham regarded them a moment longer, her eyes narrowing as though weighing some private calculation. Then she inclined her head. "Very well. Greystone Manor has always offered refuge, though I fear it brings little comfort these days. You are welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," Tommy supplied, bowing slightly. "Tommy and Tuppence." At the names, something flickered across the lady's face, recognition perhaps, or only the play of firelight. She gestured to the butler. "Take their coats. See that the fire in the drawing-room is stirred." As they crossed the hall, Tuppence's quick gaze roved everywhere. It was then she noticed it. A heavy tapestry, faded but rich with knights and unicorns, hung against the far wall. The bottom edge stirred faintly, though no draught should have reached it. Beneath, she glimpsed the carved outline of a door, and beyond that the curve of a staircase leading upward into darkness. Before she could remark upon it, Lady Havisham's voice cut across her thoughts. "This way, Mrs. Beresford. The drawing-room will be warmer." They followed into a chamber where a fire crackled beneath a marble mantel. The furnishings were splendid yet worn, as though money had run out before repairs could be made. Tommy gratefully accepted a glass of brandy pressed upon him, while Tuppence, still curious, cast a glance at their hostess. "You have a very striking house," she began lightly. "It must have quite a history." Lady Havisham's mouth tightened. "Greystone has seen more than its share. Too much, some might say." "Indeed," Tuppence prompted gently. Her hostess sighed as though burdened by memories. "Strangers may as well know it. We have had misfortunes. A maid vanished without trace some weeks ago. An heirloom stolen from its case, my husband's watch of no small value. And whispers, always whispers, of footsteps on the staircase where none ought to tread." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You think the place haunted?" "I think," Lady Havisham replied sharply, "that some secrets are best left undisturbed." The fire popped, sending up a small spray of sparks. Tuppence leaned back in her chair, her eyes alight with the thrill of mystery. Tommy, watching her, sighed inwardly. He recognized that look. Whatever storm had driven them here, another was now brewing, the storm of his wife's insatiable curiosity. And beyond the tapestry, hidden in shadow, the staircase waited. The storm did not abate, but only deepened, pressing its weight against the windows of Greystone Manor as if intent on entering. The drawing-room fire sputtered bravely, though even its glow seemed cowed by the drumming rain. Tommy, warming his hands over the mantel, glanced toward his wife with a mixture of amusement and resignation. Tuppence, however, sat upright in her chair, eyes bright, the storm outside only mirroring the quick storm of curiosity that had already taken hold of her. Lady Havisham, their reluctant hostess, returned after some moments with an air of chilly duty. "You may stay the night," she said, her voice firm but without warmth. "Greystone has rooms enough. It would be unkind to send you back into this weather." "Most gracious of you," Tommy said, bowing slightly, though the lady's expression suggested she had been compelled by duty rather than generosity. Dinner was announced almost immediately thereafter. The butler led them into the great dining hall, a chamber so long and high-roofed that the candlelight seemed to vanish before reaching the dark beams above. A long table gleamed with silver and crystal, though the setting was sparse, no more than 6 places in all. Around the table gathered the other residents and guests of Greystone. Closest to the head sat Sir Reginald Fortescue, a baronet whose florid face and booming laugh suggested hearty joviality, though the shadows beneath his eyes and the nervous twitch of his hands betrayed unease. He greeted the newcomers with extravagant courtesy. New faces, splendid. Nothing livens a dreary country house like unexpected guests. Fortescue, at your service, always delighted to meet fellow adventurers driven to sanctuary. Beside him was Miss Lydia Havisham, Lady Havisham's niece, a young woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. She inclined her head politely, but gave Tommy and Tuppence a long, measuring look, as if filing away their presence in some secret ledger. Opposite her sat Reverend Cole, a thin, ascetic man, whose hands seemed always folded in prayer, even when reaching for his glass. His voice, when he murmured a greeting, was low and solemn, as though speaking in a chapel. Last among them was Dr. Pemberton, the local physician, a compact, careful man with spectacles that glinted in the candlelight. His greeting was brisk, almost professional, and he immediately resumed a conversation with the Reverend that seemed curiously hushed. Tommy and Tuppence took their seats midway down the table, placed neatly between Sir Reginald's booming affability and Miss Lydia's keen observation. Dinner began with soup, served by the butler with the precision of a ritual. The storm hammered on, punctuating the silences with its own commentary. At first, conversation was of ordinary matters: crops, parish affairs, the inconvenience of post-deliveries delayed by rain. Yet beneath the words ran a current of tension, as though every guest spoke with half a mind on something left unsaid. Tuppence, never one to let silence reign for long, leaned slightly toward Lydia. "Your aunt was most kind to take us in. It seems a grand old house, though I dare say it has seen much history." Lydia's lips curved faintly. "Greystone has a way of holding on to its past, Mrs. Beresford. Some of it rather too tightly." Before Tuppence could press further, Sir Reginald launched into a tale of hunting in his younger days, his laughter echoing grandly until it faltered beneath Lady Havisham's sharp glance. The lady of the house had scarcely touched her plate, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the flickering chandelier above. It was Tuppence who steered the talk, deliberately, to the matter that had most intrigued her. She set down her spoon with a delicate clink. "I heard mention earlier," she said lightly, "of a maid who disappeared. A strange business, surely." The effect was instantaneous. Fawkes hesitated, eyes shifted, and the thunder outside seemed to pause in expectation. Lady Havisham's head turned slowly, her expression like ice. "The girl eloped," she said firmly. "Such things are common enough with servants. She fancied herself in love with some fellow and ran away. That is all." "But without her belongings?" Tuppence asked sweetly. "And without a word to anyone?" Miss Lydia gave a short laugh, not entirely mirthful. "You mustn't ask too many questions, Mrs. Beresford. Those who pry into matters beyond the staircase often find more than they wish." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Tommy glanced at Tuppence, whose eyes had brightened further. Lady Havisham's hand gripped her wineglass so tightly the stem threatened to break. "Lydia," she said sharply, "that will do." Reverend Cole cleared his throat. "The young are fond of melodrama," he murmured. "Better to let certain matters rest in God's hands than stir them up at the dinner table." "Quite so, De Pemberton agreed hastily. His spectacles glinted as he glanced down at his plate. "The girl's fate is no business of ours now. Let us not distress Lady Havisham with such talk." But the damage was done. The atmosphere, already taut, had grown oppressive, like the air before lightning strikes. Each guest seemed to retreat into their own silence, thoughts turning inward. The storm outside punctuated the silence with sudden violence. A crack of thunder boomed directly overhead, and with it the chandelier swayed alarmingly, crystals jingling like a warning. For a moment, it seemed the entire structure might come crashing down upon the table. Lady Havisham gasped, half rising from her chair, while Sir Reginald muttered a curse. "It's secure," De Pemberton said quickly, though his own face had paled. "The wind only, nothing more." Still, the sense of menace lingered. The candles flickered, shadows leapt across the high ceiling, and in the strained hush that followed, even Tommy felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. Tuppence, refusing to appear cowed, raised her glass with a bright smile. "Well," she said, "if the storm means to test us, we may as well drink to survival." Sir Reginald gave a booming laugh, too hearty by half. "Hear, hear!" He drained his glass with the air of a man warding off demons. Dinner continued, though little more was spoken. The storm raged on, rattling the windows like impatient hands, and in the long hall of Greystone the guests ate in uneasy companionship. Later, as the plates were cleared and the company dispersed, Tuppence leaned close to Tommy. "Well, darling," she murmured, "we have our dramatis personae, a baronet with debts, a niece with sharp eyes, a reverend who prefers silence, and a physician altogether too brisk. And presiding over it all, our Lady Havisham, who trembles whenever the staircase is named." Tommy sighed, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I knew that look in your eye when we walked through the door. This is no longer shelter from a storm. It's the beginning of a case." Tuppence's smile was quick and conspiratorial. "Exactly. And I, for one, mean to find out what lies beyond that staircase." Above them, as though answering, the wind howled down the chimneys of Greystone, carrying with it a note that sounded almost like laughter. The storm showed no mercy that night. Rain lashed the mullioned windows with the fury of 1,000 fists, and the wind prowled the eaves like some restless spirit hunting for a way inside. The corridors of Greystone Manor groaned under the strain, as though the house itself resented the intrusion of storm and strangers alike. Tommy, characteristically unconcerned, had collapsed into the bed provided for them, a vast canopied contraption that could have concealed a regiment beneath its curtains, and was already breathing with the steady rhythm of sleep. Tuppence, however, lay wakeful, her sharp mind refusing to be lulled. It was some time past midnight when she heard it, faint, so faint she almost doubted her own ears. A whisper, no more than a thread of sound drifting through the stone passages. Then, distinctly, the creak of a step upon a stair. Tuppence sat upright, heart thudding. She listened again, straining to separate storm from human sound. Yes, there it was. A shuffle, a pause, another step. Not the purposeful stride of a servant about nightly duties, but hesitant, furtive, as though someone moved in fear of being discovered. Slipping from the bed, she wrapped a shawl about her shoulders. Tommy stirred, muttered something about lemon soufflé, and turned over without opening his eyes. Tuppence gave a soft chuckle. A fine detective you are, dreaming of puddings when the house is alive with secrets. She took the candle from the bedside table, shielding the flame with her hand as she slipped into the corridor. The air was chill, carrying the faint smell of damp stone. Shadows leapt along the walls as she moved, her slippered feet making little sound on the rug-strewn floor. The whispers led her inevitably toward the great hall. There hung the tapestry she had noticed before, its embroidered knights and unicorns rendered ghostly in the unsteady light. She held her breath, listening. Again, the creak of a step, just beyond the woven fabric. With a swift tug, she drew the tapestry aside. The concealed staircase yawned before her, a narrow spiral twisting upward into darkness. "Now then," she murmured, "what are you hiding?" She placed a foot on the first step. The wood answered with a groan as if warning her back. Candle in hand, she began to climb. The stairwell smelled of dust and disuse, yet the footprints in the dust were fresh, clear marks of someone else's passage. Her pulse quickened. Up she went, each step protesting under her weight, until at last she reached a door at the top. She tried the handle. It rattled but held firm, locked from the other side. The whispers ceased. Only the storm remained, rattling tiles and hissing against the walls. "Clever," Tuppence whispered to herself. "Very clever. But locked doors only make me more curious." She pressed her ear to the panel, but silence answered. With a sigh of mingled frustration and excitement, she turned back, her candle guttering dangerously in the draught. When she returned to the room, Tommy opened one bleary eye. "Where have you been prowling at this hour?" "Listening to footsteps on a staircase that shouldn't be walked," she replied crisply, setting the candle down. He groaned. "My dear girl, you've let Lydia's nonsense get into your head. Next you'll be seeing knights from the tapestry galloping about the corridors. Come to bed." But though his tone was teasing, Tuppence noticed the quick glance he gave toward the darkened hall. Even Tommy, practical as he was, did not relish the thought of hidden staircases and whispering voices in the night. The next morning brought a fragile calm. The storm had spent its fury, leaving behind dripping gutters and skies washed pale grey. The manor seemed subdued, its inhabitants moving with weary restraint, as though the house itself needed time to recover from the battering. Over breakfast, Tuppence's eyes lingered on the other guests. Sir Reginald attacked his bacon with gusto, yet his joviality seemed forced, a shade too hearty. Lydia appeared thoughtful, her gaze distant. Reverend Cole intoned a blessing with unusual fervour, while Dr. Pemberton buttered his toast with precise nervous strokes. Lady Havisham did not appear at all. After the meal, Tuppence sought out the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, a stout woman with capable hands and eyes that darted like wary birds. She found her in the morning room, polishing silver that scarcely needed it. "Mrs. Finch," Tuppence began pleasantly, "I must thank you for the comforts of last night. It can't have been easy, accommodating us unexpectedly." The woman gave a short nod. "We do what her ladyship commands, madam." Tuppence leaned closer. "And what does her ladyship command about that staircase?" Mrs. Finch froze, her cloth pausing mid-swipe. "Best not speak of that, madam." "Oh, but I do so love a secret," Tuppence said lightly. "Last night I heard whispers there. Surely you've noticed something yourself." The housekeeper's lips tightened. "If you value your safety, you'll leave things well enough alone. Some doors are locked for good reason. And some folk, well, they'd rather not have curious eyes poking where they don't belong." "That sounds almost like a warning," Tuppence said softly. "It is," Mrs. Finch replied, and her voice trembled despite her firmness. "We've had enough misfortune here. Don't go adding more." She returned to her polishing with a determined air that brooked no further questions. Tuppence withdrew, but far from being deterred, her curiosity blazed brighter. She found Tommy waiting in the corridor, hands in pockets, whistling tunelessly. "And what pearl of wisdom did the housekeeper bestow?" he asked. "That I should leave things alone," Tuppence answered, "which naturally means I shan't." Later that morning, the atmosphere in Greystone grew heavier still. Lady Havisham appeared in the drawing-room, pale as parchment, her hands trembling upon the arm of her chair. Dr. Pemberton hovered near, fussing with his stethoscope and a small black bag. "You see," he was saying, "there is nothing to be alarmed about. A touch of exhaustion, perhaps. Rest is all you need." Lady Havisham looked at him with eyes dark and haunted. "Rest will not mend what troubles me, doctor. My malady is not of the body, but of the soul." Her words sent a ripple through the company. Reverend Cole bowed his head, murmuring something about spiritual burdens. Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lydia bent closer to her aunt, pressing her hand gently. Tuppence, ever alert, caught the flicker in Dr. Pemberton's expression, a flash of irritation swiftly masked by professional calm. He spoke briskly, almost too briskly. "Your aunt must avoid excitement, Miss Lydia. Overindulgence in melancholy thoughts can be more harmful than any physical illness." But Lady Havisham did not seem to hear him. She stared toward the hall, toward the tapestry that concealed the staircase, and her lips moved as though framing a silent prayer. Tommy whispered in his wife's ear, "If this continues, I shall be forced to believe in curses myself." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "Not curses, darling, secrets, and I dare say one of them is locked at the top of that staircase." The day passed under a pall of unease. Servants moved quietly, as if treading on eggshells. The guests kept to themselves, each wrapped in their own thoughts. From time to time, Tuppence glimpsed Mrs. Finch watching her with something like fear, while Sir Reginald drank more than was strictly polite before luncheon. Yet through it all, one impression hardened in Tuppence's mind. Lady Havisham was a woman haunted not by superstition, but by knowledge. The pallor, the trembling, the half-spoken words, these were not signs of frailty alone. They were signs of guilt, or else of a terrible truth carried too long. As twilight fell once more across the damp lawns of Greystone, Tuppence sat by the fire, her shawl about her shoulders, and whispered to herself. Whispers, footsteps, warnings, a locked door, and a house where every face tells half a story. The question is, who will tell me the other half? Later that same morning, pale light filtered through the tall, narrow windows, as though reluctant to enter the sombre corridors of Greystone Manor. The rain had eased at last, but the lawns outside were sodden, the gravel paths glistening with puddles. Inside, the house felt hushed, too hushed, as though its very walls were keeping counsel with secrets best left unspoken. Tommy, never one to linger long over brooding architecture, declared that a day trapped indoors demanded occupation. He was not, however, prepared for Tuppence's bright suggestion that occupation might take the form of poking about in Greystone's less frequented corners. "Library," she said firmly after breakfast. "Every house of this size has one, and if there are secrets, you may be sure they'll find their way there." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Most people go to libraries for books, not skeletons." "Books are only another form of skeletons," Tuppence replied, adjusting her scarf with mock solemnity. "They preserve the bones of the past, though sometimes, happily, they come with flesh still on." The butler directed them down a side corridor into a long chamber lined from floor to ceiling with shelves of dark oak. Tall ladders leaned against the stacks, and the smell of old leather and dust hung heavy in the air. A fire had been laid but not lit, so the room felt cool, almost damp. Tommy ran a finger along a shelf. "Dry as tinder. And yet, I suppose someone reads these things. They're not only for show." "They're for concealment," Tuppence corrected, already prowling toward a great walnut desk that dominated the centre. The surface was tidy, too tidy. Papers arranged with unnatural precision, ink well polished, blotter unused. She tapped the drawers meaningfully. "Go on, Tommy. Put your criminal experience to good use." Tommy sighed with exaggerated patience. "The trouble with you, Tuppence, is that you treat burglary as a branch of detective science." Nevertheless, he knelt at the side of the desk and tried the drawers. Most slid open readily enough, filled with ledgers, correspondence, and the usual debris of household management. One, however, resisted. Its lock was old but sturdy, and it refused to yield. "That," said Tuppence, leaning over him, "is the one worth opening." Tommy fished a small penknife from his pocket, muttering about the indignity of risking the family silver for the sake of curiosity. With a careful twist, the lock gave way, and the drawer slid open with a faint sigh. Inside lay a bundle of papers, charred, brittle, their edges blackened as though snatched from a fire. Tommy lifted them carefully onto the desk, brushing away flakes of ash. Tuppence bent close, her eyes narrowing. Letters, half burned but legible enough. Look here, the maid's name, Alice. The surviving fragments spoke in hurried scrawls of things overheard, of fear of discovery, and of a small book in which the girl claimed she had written everything, a diary. She kept records, Tuppence breathed. Not just gossip. She meant to protect herself. Why else write it down? Tommy frowned, turning a sheet so that the light fell across it. But if these letters are burned, wouldn't the diary have met the same fate? Not necessarily. Burning is only half the truth. Someone wanted us to believe it destroyed. Later that morning in the drawing room, Tuppence found Lydia seated with her embroidery, the needle flashing in and out of the linen with a precision that seemed almost aggressive. Such a talent, Tuppence remarked lightly, settling beside her. You must have steady nerves. Steady enough, Lydia replied, eyes fixed on her work. Tuppence let a silence hang, then said, I came across mention of a diary belonging to Alice, the missing maid. I understand it was quite detailed. Lydia's needle halted in mid-air. A faint colour rose in her cheeks. That diary was destroyed. Weeks ago. There was a fire in the laundry room. Foolish of her to hide it among the linen. Tuppence smiled. How convenient that a servant's secrets should perish so completely. Lydia turned sharply. You suggest I know more than I've said? Not at all, Tuppence replied sweetly. Only that diaries have a most inconvenient habit of turning up again long after we believe them gone. Lydia resumed her stitching, but the thread snagged, and her hand trembled slightly as she worked it free. When Tuppence recounted the conversation, Tommy shook his head. You do enjoy ruffling feathers, but she's right, isn't she? The letters were burned, that should be proof enough. Proof of the attempt, yes, Tuppence said, but not of success. Listen, Tommy, didn't you notice anything near the staircase on the floorboards? I noticed dust, he admitted. And scorch marks, Tuppence pressed. Faint, but there. As if something had been burned hastily and not quite cleanly. Why burn papers by the staircase, if not to suggest an accident, unless the diary itself was spirited away? Tommy shrugged, though unease flickered in his eyes. So the thing still exists. But where? That, said Tuppence, is what we must discover. The answer did not come quickly. That afternoon, raised voices echoed through the manor, drawing the household to the drawing room. Sir Reginald stood near the fire, face flushed, hands clenched. Lady Havisham, pale and rigid, faced him across the hearth. You owe me more than excuses, Sir Reginald thundered. Debts mount, and still you refuse assistance. Do you mean to see me ruined? Lady Havisham's eyes flashed. I owe you nothing, Reginald. My late husband's estate is not a purse for your follies. Follies, he spat. Is it folly to keep creditors from my door? You sit here in your crumbling house with your secrets and your ghosts while I— He broke off, glancing toward the others who had entered. His chest heaved, and with a muttered curse he stormed from the room. Lady Havisham sagged against a chair, her hand pressed to her brow. Lydia rushed to her side, murmuring comfort. Dr. Pemberton followed quickly, producing a small vial from his pocket. A sedative, he said, his tone too brisk. For the nerves. Lady Havisham waved it away. No medicine can quiet the truth, Doctor, not when it walks these halls by night. Her words sent another ripple through the company. Reverend Cole murmured a prayer, while Tuppence's keen eyes observed each face in turn. The defiant niece, the troubled physician, the housekeeper hovering at the door. Each seemed bound to the mystery by invisible threads. That evening, as twilight settled and the house grew dim, Tuppence sat with Tommy in their chamber. The quarrel was about money, Tommy observed. That much is clear. Money may be the surface, Tuppence said slowly, but beneath lies something deeper. A diary full of secrets, a maid who disappears, scorch marks near a staircase no one dares climb. And now Lady Havisham's talk of truth walking by night. Tommy chuckled without mirth. You make it sound like a novel. It is a novel, Tuppence returned. We're only living in it. The manor settled into uneasy silence as the night wore on. Lamps flickered out, doors closed softly, footsteps receded. Wind moaned faintly through the chimneys, carrying the smell of damp earth and ivy. Tommy slept easily enough, though his dreams were troubled. Tuppence, however, lay wakeful once again, her ears tuned to every sound. She thought of the charred letters, of Lydia's denial, of Lady Havisham's trembling voice. Then she heard it, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for wind at first. But no, the pattern was human, a low, steady sobbing, as though someone wept with muffled grief. Tuppence sat upright, straining. The sound drifted from above, faint but distinct. She slipped from the bed, moving to the window, but the lawns outside lay empty. No, this sorrow was within the house. "Tommy," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. He blinked awake. "What is it now? More knights on horseback?" "Listen." Reluctantly he did. For a long moment, only silence. Then, faint but clear, the sobbing came again, from the direction of the concealed staircase. Tommy's eyes widened, though he tried to mask it with a grin. "Well, well, either your imagination is catching, or someone in this house is very much alive when they oughtn't to be." "All the female guests are accounted for," Tuppence said, "which leaves us with one conclusion. There is another woman here, and she has reason to weep." The sobbing faded, swallowed by the silence of the old house, but Tuppence knew with a certainty that chilled her blood that the staircase hid not only the truth of the past, but also a living secret that still breathed in sorrow above them. The sobbing Tuppence had heard in the night haunted her dreams. By morning it had faded into memory, but not into doubt. Someone, some woman, was concealed in the upper reaches of Greystone Manor, and if that was true, then the missing maid had not merely run away, nor had her diary vanished by accident. The threads of the story were tightening, and Tuppence intended to tug them. Tommy, stirring sugar into his morning tea, regarded her determined expression with affectionate resignation. "Your eyes," he remarked, "have that bright, dangerous glint that usually means I shall soon be forced to interrogate half of England." "Not half," Tuppence corrected, buttering her toast with a firmness that brooked no debate. "Merely everyone under this roof. Alibis are the bones of any investigation, Tommy, and we must rattle them." They began with Sir Reginald. He was in the billiard room, cue in hand, scowling at a missed shot. The clatter of the balls punctuated his irritation. "Good morning," Tuppence said brightly. "We were curious about the night Alice disappeared. Where were you then?" Sir Reginald's cue froze mid-air. His ruddy complexion deepened further. "Cards," he said shortly, "with Dr. Pemberton and the vicar. Whole blessed evening." Tommy leaned against the billiard table, casual. "A long game?" "Until after midnight," Sir Reginald replied, chalking his cue with exaggerated vigour. "Plenty of witnesses. Ask them. I'm no nursemaid to runaway maids." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Strange, though, that neither of the others mentioned cards when we spoke in passing yesterday." The baronet swore under his breath, sending a ball spinning across the table with unnecessary force. "People forget things, that's all. Leave it be, Mrs. Beresford." But Tuppence noted the beads of sweat forming on his brow, and the way his eyes darted toward the door as if half afraid of who might be listening. The Reverend Cole was found in the chapel-like morning room, Bible open upon his knees. His thin face lifted as they entered, expression grave. "The maid," Tuppence began gently. "The night she vanished. You recall where you were?" "Indeed," the Reverend replied. "I was among my parishioners bringing comfort to a family in distress. They will vouch for me." Tommy studied him. "And you returned late?" "Near dawn," Cole admitted. "My duty kept me long." His eyes flickered downward, hands tightening upon the Bible. "Curious," Tuppence said softly, "for Sir Reginald insists you spent the night at cards with him and the doctor." The Reverend's lips moved, forming a silent prayer. Then he said, "The baronet misremembers. Temptations cloud the memory of men." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. Either Sir Reginald or the Reverend, or both, were lying. Dr. Pemberton was easier to find. His brisk footsteps echoed in the hall as he emerged from Lady Havisham's chamber, snapping his black bag shut. "Another call?" Tuppence asked lightly. "Her ladyship's nerves," he replied curtly. "Rest and medicine, she'll manage." Tommy tilted his head. "And on the night Alice vanished? Busy then as well?" "Urgent summonses," Pemberton said at once. "2 patients, both grave. I was gone most of the night." "Which patients?" Tuppence asked. The doctor hesitated. "Confidential, you understand." Of course, Tuppence murmured. Confidential, but easily confirmed, surely. The doctor's eyes narrowed behind his spectacles. If you mean to play inquisitors, I suggest you confine your curiosity. Meddling in medical affairs is most unwise. With that, he swept past them, coat-tails snapping. Tommy whistled. 3 men, 3 alibis, none agreeing. I'd almost think they were conspiring, except they can't even align their lies properly. Which makes them all the more suspicious, Tuppence replied with satisfaction. That afternoon, the household gathered in the hall. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and damp, and the fire struggled against the chill. Tuppence, her expression one of casual innocence, bent near the tapestry that concealed the staircase. With deft fingers she produced a small brooch, one she had slipped from her own jewel case, letting it fall with a deliberate clink to the floorboards. "Oh dear," she exclaimed, stooping up. "What's this? A trinket near the staircase." Her announcement rippled through the company. Lydia went pale, her embroidery slipping from her hands. Sir Reginald swore violently, the sound startling in the solemn hall. Reverend Cole muttered a prayer, crossing himself. Lady Havisham rose abruptly, her face white as parchment. "Enough," she declared. "This morbid fascination with staircases and trinkets must cease. We are not children hunting phantoms." Tuppence straightened, slipping the brooch into her palm. Her eyes moved deliberately across the group. "But surely one must wonder how such a thing came to be here, unless someone has been exploring." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken accusation. Even Tommy, who usually preferred a joke at such moments, felt the chill of danger drawing closer. That evening, as they retreated to the dim-lit drawing-room, Tuppence and Tommy reviewed their impressions. "Sir Reginald," Tuppence said thoughtfully, "desperate for money. Debts can make a man reckless. If Alice overheard something compromising, he might have silenced her to avoid blackmail. Or to seize the family purse," Tommy added. "His quarrel with Lady Havisham makes that plain enough." "Then there's Reverend Cole," Tuppence went on, "a pious man, but evasive. Why claim to be with parishioners if he truly spent the night at cards, unless he fears scandal or worse?" Tommy poured a measure of brandy. "The doctor worries me most. Too quick to brush off questions, too brisk with Lady Havisham's frailty. A man with access to secrets both medical and personal." "And Lydia," Tuppence added softly. "She tries to appear aloof, but that pallor when I drop the brooch. She knows more than she says. Perhaps the diary was hers to find. Perhaps she destroyed it. Or perhaps she kept it." Tommy leaned back, glass in hand. "We're circling, my dear. Motives are plenty. Money, reputation, fear. But no proof." "Not yet," Tuppence agreed. "But the staircase still waits, and so does the woman who sobs above it." Dinner that night was strained. Conversation faltered, punctuated by clinks of cutlery and uneasy coughs. Lady Havisham barely touched her food, eyes fixed on some inner torment. Sir Reginald drank deeply, laughter forced and hollow. Lydia kept her gaze downcast, stitching nervously at her napkin. Reverend Cole intoned a grace longer than usual, his words falling heavy in the silence. Dr. Pemberton alone seemed composed, though his eyes flickered too often toward Lady Havisham, as if measuring her strength. At last Lady Havisham rose. "I will retire. My nerves—" She swayed slightly, and Lydia rushed to her side. Together they left the room, followed closely by the doctor. The remaining guests exchanged uneasy glances. Sir Reginald muttered something about damned theatrics and pushed back his chair. The Reverend excused himself with murmured solemnity. Tommy and Tuppence were left alone with the fading fire. "Well," Tommy said dryly, "if ever I wanted a cast of suspects fit for a novel, here they are. Money troubles, sanctimonious lies, medical secrets, and family inheritance. Enough motives to fill 3 murders." "And yet only one maid missing," Tuppence replied. "But I wonder if she is missing, or merely hidden. That sobbing, Tommy, that sobbing was real." He frowned into the fire. "If so, then someone is protecting her, or imprisoning her." "Either way," Tuppence said, her voice low, "the staircase is the heart of it. And hearts, however silent, always beat." The hour grew late. The storm had passed, but unease lay heavy over Greystone. Somewhere in the upper reaches of the house a door creaked faintly. Tuppence lifted her head, listening. Nothing followed. She turned back to Tommy. "Tomorrow, we press harder. Alibis crack when tested, and secrets cannot stay locked forever. Tommy raised his glass in salute. To rattling bones, then. The fire sputtered, shadows deepened, and the manor seemed to draw its breath, waiting for what would come next. The rain had returned. By nightfall the heavens opened once more, and the storm descended on Greystone Manor with renewed fury. Wind clawed at the shutters, and water coursed down the stone walls as though seeking entry. Inside, the household gathered uneasily in the drawing room, the fire spitting sparks, the atmosphere tense as wire stretched too tight. Tommy stretched his legs toward the hearth with studied casualness, but his eyes were watchful. Tuppence, upright in her chair, seemed to lean into the storm, as though it might whisper its secrets if she listened closely enough. Lady Havisham sat rigid, one hand gripping her niece's arm for support. Lydia murmured softly, though her own eyes darted often toward the door. Sir Reginald poured himself another drink, his hand not entirely steady, while Reverend Cole muttered occasional prayers under his breath. Dr. Pemberton, spectacles flashing, paced restlessly, as though every moment seated were a personal affront. It was the butler, solemn Mr. Graves, who broke the uneasy silence. He entered swiftly, his face pale beneath the steady mask of his profession. "My lady," he said, his voice hushed yet urgent, "there has been a discovery." Every head lifted. The storm roared outside as though punctuating his words. "A discovery?" Lady Havisham's voice trembled. "What do you mean?" "In the disused wing, madam," Graves said, "beyond the staircase. I found—" He swallowed. "I found a body." The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples through the company. Lydia gasped. Sir Reginald cursed. Reverend Cole crossed himself hurriedly. Tuppence's eyes widened, and Tommy was already on his feet. "Show us," he said sharply. The butler inclined his head, and the group moved together through the hall. The storm battered the windows as they passed, lantern light bobbing ahead, shadows twisting along the walls. At the tapestry, Graves drew it back with reverent caution, revealing the narrow stair. Graves lifted a ring of old keys. "I keep the master key to the upper lock, madam, by her ladyship's order when the wing was sealed years ago." The air beyond smelled of damp neglect. They climbed in single file, their footsteps creaking in mournful unison. The disused wing lay silent, its rooms long abandoned. Dust lay thick upon the floors, broken only by the recent marks of the butler's tread. At the end of a corridor he stopped, lifting his lantern toward a half-open door. Inside, on the bare boards, lay the body of a woman. She was hastily concealed beneath old sheets, one arm protruding, pale against the shadows. Her hair, dark and matted, spread across the floor like a halo turned sinister. Lady Havisham gave a cry and clutched Lydia's hand. "No, no, not here." Dr. Pemberton stepped forward briskly, though his face was set. Kneeling, he examined the body with clinical precision. "Female. Dead some weeks at least. The state of decay confirms it. Likely the missing maid." The air seemed to grow colder. Tuppence drew nearer, her gaze fixed on the lifeless form. The girl's shoes were scuffed, her apron torn. Whoever had left her here had done so in haste, perhaps even panic. Tommy muttered under his breath. "So much for tales of elopement." Lady Havisham swayed, her face ashen. "I knew nothing," she whispered. "You must believe me. Nothing of this. She was gone. I thought she had fled." She sagged against her niece, eyes fluttering shut. Dr. Pemberton hurried to her side, pressing fingers to her wrist. "Her pulse is weak. We must move her at once. She cannot bear such shocks." Lydia guided her aunt from the room, murmuring urgently. Reverend Cole followed, muttering prayers of absolution. Sir Reginald lingered only a moment before turning away, muttering darkly about curses and ruin. That left Tommy and Tuppence alone with the butler and the body. The storm rattled the windows in the disused corridor, and for a long moment none spoke. At last Tuppence knelt, her eyes roving the boards. "Tommy," she said softly, "look here. Scuff marks, as though she was dragged. This was no peaceful death." Tommy's jaw tightened. Murder, then, and in this house all along. Word of the discovery spread swiftly. Servants whispered in corners, their faces pale with dread. Doors opened and closed hastily. The air of Greystone changed. No longer merely oppressive, it now vibrated with fear. In the great hall, Sir Reginald stormed about, demanding brandy and shouting at Graves for not discovering the body sooner. Lydia sat pale and silent, her embroidery forgotten. Reverend Cole's voice rose in fervent prayer. Dr. Pemberton returned at last, declaring Lady Havisham fragile but stable, though his own face was tight with strain. "We must summon the police," he said firmly. "At once. This is beyond us now." "Of course," Tommy agreed, "but while we wait, we shall do what we can. After all," his eyes gleamed, "we are already entangled." Tuppence nodded. "And perhaps closer to the truth than the murderer would like." Later, when the household dispersed, Tuppence sat with Tommy near the drawing-room fire. The storm still raged, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "That girl upstairs," she whispered. "The sobbing I heard. It cannot have been this maid. The doctor says she has been dead for weeks, which means—" "Another woman," Tommy finished grimly. "Alive, hidden." Tuppence's eyes darkened. "And in danger. Whoever killed Alice would not hesitate to silence another if discovery threatened." Tommy placed a hand over hers. "Then we must find her, before the murderer does." By morning, the storm had broken once more into a grey drizzle. Inspector Miles from the county constabulary arrived, his boots muddy, his expression stern. He listened without comment as the butler recounted his discovery and the doctor confirmed the time of death. "Likely your missing maid," Miles said at last. "We'll have to confirm, but she's been dead long enough that whoever is responsible has had time to cover his tracks. Still, the truth leaves footprints, even when men try to hide them." His eyes swept the assembled guests. Sir Reginald, Lydia, Reverend Cole, Dr. Pemberton, Lady Havisham, pale and trembling in her chair. "No one leaves the house. Until we know more, you are all under suspicion." A collective shiver seemed to pass through the group. Tuppence's eyes met Tommy's. The game had shifted. The manor was no longer merely a house of whispers. It was now a crime scene. The hours that followed were thick with unease. Sir Reginald paced restlessly, muttering about ruined reputations and creditors. Reverend Cole retreated into prayer, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Lydia attended her aunt with pale devotion, though her eyes seemed always shadowed with fear. Dr. Pemberton maintained a facade of professional calm, but his hands trembled when he poured tea. Lady Havisham barely spoke at all, her silence more eloquent than words. Tuppence watched them each in turn, noting every glance, every hesitation. Each carried secrets. Each had reasons to fear exposure. And somewhere in the echoing halls of Greystone, another woman, still alive, waited in sorrow. That night, as the storm lessened to a steady drizzle, Tommy and Tuppence lay awake once more. The house seemed to breathe around them, timbers creaking, wind sighing through the chimneys. Tuppence whispered, "I cannot rest. Every sound is a reminder that she may be up there, imprisoned." Tommy nodded. "And every hour that passes, the murderer grows bolder. Now that the body has been found, desperation may drive him to worse." Silence settled between them. Then, faintly came a sound, a door creaking above. They held their breath, listening. But this time no sobbing followed, only the silence of secrets yet concealed. Tuppence's hand closed tightly around Tommy's. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady. "We search again. We must. For her." And outside the rain whispered against the stone, like tears shed for the dead, and for the living still trapped in shadow. The morning after the discovery was heavy with silence. Even the servants, usually bustling through Greystone's corridors, moved in subdued whispers, as though the house itself demanded reverence for the dead girl hidden so long in its walls. Tuppence sat at the breakfast table, untouched toast before her, her mind racing. Across from her, Tommy folded his newspaper with a snap. "Enough dithering," he declared. "If we mean to understand what happened here, we must start where it all begins, behind that tapestry." Tuppence's lips curved faintly. "Darling, you're becoming positively reckless. I might almost believe you enjoy this." Tommy gave a rueful smile. "Not enjoy, but I dislike being the guest of a murderer." They chose their moment carefully. When the household dispersed, Sir Reginald to the stables, Lydia tending to her aunt, Dr. Pemberton closeted in his chamber, they slipped into the great hall. The tapestry loomed, its woven knights and unicorns as stiff and silent as sentries. Tommy drew it aside, and the narrow stair revealed itself once more, spiralling into shadow. The air smelled of dust and neglect, but something sharper too, the faint tang of smoke, as though long ago papers had burned here. "Ladies first," Tommy murmured. "Not on your life," Tuppence returned briskly, lifting her candle. "If danger lurks above, I insist on discovering it myself." Together they climbed, the wood groaning beneath their steps. Their shadows twisted along the walls like phantoms eager to whisper secrets. At the top, the stair opened into a corridor lined with closed doors. Tuppence pressed her hand against the nearest. It yielded grudgingly, hinges squealing in protest. The room beyond was thick with dust. Shafts of light filtered through warped shutters, catching on cobwebs that draped like tattered curtains. Old trunks stood stacked against the walls, their brass fittings tarnished, their leather cracked. Faded portraits leaned drunkenly, their painted eyes dim with neglect. Tommy sneezed violently. Good heavens! A century of dust and mildew. No wonder Lady Havisham avoids the place. Tuppence moved from trunk to trunk, her fingers trailing over initials nearly worn away. This is no mere storage. It feels like an oubliette of family shame. Things hidden rather than forgotten. Another door opened onto a chamber where a broken cradle sagged in one corner. A child's shoe, tiny and long-rotted, lay discarded on the hearth. The air carried a faint chill that seemed older than the storm. "Creepy as anything," Tommy muttered. "And yet, someone has been here more recently." He pointed to footprints in the dust, faint but clear, leading deeper down the corridor. At the end of the hall, a small room waited, bare but for a locked chest beneath the window. The wood was dark, the metal bands heavy with rust, but the padlock was newer. "Well, well," Tuppence said softly, "a modern touch in an ancient wing. That's always worth investigating." Tommy knelt, examining the lock. Nothing a pocket knife and ingenuity can't manage. It took only moments. With a twist and grunt, the lock snapped open, clattering to the floor. Together they lifted the lid. Inside lay linens yellowed with age, shawls eaten by moths, and beneath these, wrapped in a faded apron, a small leather-bound book. Its cover was scorched at the edges, but the pages within survived. Tuppence's breath caught. The diary. They opened it carefully. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, but legible. "I've heard them quarrelling again. The voices carry through the doors. Lady H says the truth must remain hidden, but the others, oh, if anyone knew." Dr. P came late at night. Why? I cannot guess. He carried papers, and I think money changed hands. Sir R speaks often of debts. I heard him demand money in the hall. If he knew the secret, he could use it against her. The Reverend, he prays loudly, but his eyes are sly. Once he came from the stair, though he swore never to enter here. He knows. The entries grew more frantic toward the end. There is a secret the family would kill to protect. I must keep this diary safe. If anything happens to me, let these words speak. The final page ended mid-sentence. The next was torn clean away. It looked deliberately torn, as if kept back for leverage. Tuppence closed the book slowly, her eyes bright. "This is it, Tommy. Proof the maid feared for her life. Proof she held something over them. But what?" Tommy frowned. "And who tore away the last page? The murderer, surely. Whatever it contained was the key." They carried the diary back down, but as they descended the stair they nearly collided with Reverend Cole himself, standing at the bottom, hands clasped. His eyes widened at the sight of them. "What business have you there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Exploring," Tommy said evenly. "Curiosity, you know." Cole's gaze flicked upward, then away. "That wing is cursed. None of us go there." "Curious," Tuppence said lightly, "for the maid's diary mentions seeing you come from that very stair." Colour drained from his cheeks. He stammered, "A lie. The girl was fanciful, wicked perhaps. Do not trust her words." "But you seem very familiar with those rooms," Tommy observed, "almost as though you've stood in them yourself." The Reverend muttered something about prayer, then brushed past them, his face ashen. Tuppence watched him go, her suspicion sharpening. That afternoon, while Tommy prowled elsewhere, Lydia sought Tuppence in the drawing-room. The younger woman looked pale, her hands twisting together. "I wanted to speak with you," she began hesitantly. I think you are trying to help us, or at least to help my aunt. Tuppence inclined her head. I should like to, if I can, but help is difficult when truths are concealed. Lydia's eyes filled with sudden tears. You don't understand. My aunt has suffered terribly. She is not cruel, only afraid. She has been protecting someone. Protecting, Tuppence repeated softly. Lydia nodded. I cannot say more, but please, believe she is not the monster some might think. Her silence is not guilt, but duty. Tuppence thought of the midnight sobbing on the stair and said nothing. Before Tuppence could press further, Lydia fled, leaving only the echo of her words behind. That evening, Tommy and Tuppence sat together near the fire, the diary open between them. Rain pattered softly at the windows, the storm having lost its rage, but not its persistence. Tommy tapped the page. So, we have arguments, clandestine meetings, money changing hands, and a secret the family would kill to protect. That much is clear. But what is the secret? Tuppence leaned back, her eyes narrowing. Something hidden in those rooms. Something Lady Havisham protects, Lydia knows, and the Reverend fears will uncover. The maid knew too much, and she died for it. And the missing page, Tommy added. Always the missing page. Silence stretched, broken only by the fire's crackle. Then Tuppence spoke again, her voice low. Tommy, I cannot shake the feeling. The sobbing I heard still lingers. If another woman is concealed above, then Lydia's words about protection may not be metaphor. She may mean it quite literally. Tommy set his glass down. Then our task is clear. We must find her before the murderer does. The diary lay open, its words dark and jagged upon the page. Beyond the hall the staircase waited, silent and secret still. And in the hush of the old house, contradictions multiplied, weaving their tangled web ever tighter around Greystone Manor. The storm had at last passed, leaving Greystone Manor wrapped in a damp, oppressive stillness. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and extinguished fire, yet inside the atmosphere was no less charged. For all the murmured prayers and polite meals, the truth remained. A murdered girl had been hidden beneath the very roof they shared, and the murderer was still among them. Tommy stood near the window, hands thrust into his pockets, gazing out over the mist-drenched lawns. It's like a stage set, he remarked, one of those dreary melodramas where everyone's a suspect, and the audience knows it except the characters themselves. Tuppence, seated with the maid's diary in her lap, smiled faintly. Darling, if we're characters, then we're the ones tasked with spotting the guilty before the curtain falls. She tapped a page. Listen again. The family would kill to protect the secret, and then, several times over, the key under the stair. Not once, but 3 times. Why repeat it unless it mattered? Tommy frowned. Key to what? A door? A chest? A conscience? Perhaps all 3, Tuppence replied. But before we rush off prying floorboards, we must first untangle the people. Motives are masks, Tommy, we must strip them away. They began with Sir Reginald, found brooding in the smoking room, his glass of brandy already half empty, though the clock had only just passed noon. Beresfords, he greeted, attempting a jovial tone that did not quite mask his irritation. Come to share a drink? Nothing better for the nerves, I assure you. Tommy declined. Tuppence leaned against the mantel, studying him with polite interest. We were curious, Sir Reginald, about Alice. Did she ever confide in you? The baronet snorted. Confide? A servant? Nonsense, though I dare say she had eyes and ears enough. Always hovering, that one. Perhaps she overheard something inconvenient, Tuppence suggested. For a fleeting moment his expression hardened. If she did, she kept it to herself. And if you mean to imply I silenced her, well, you're barking up the wrong tree. I've troubles enough without adding murder. Debts, you mean? Tommy said casually. Sir Reginald stiffened. Who told you that? Cards, horses, the usual, Tommy continued mildly. Debts make a man desperate, sometimes desperate enough to— Enough! Sir Reginald slammed his glass down. Yes, I owe more than is comfortable. Yes, I pressed Lady Havisham for assistance, but killing a maid? That's absurd. I may be a fool, Beresford, but I'm no villain. His protest rang loud, but desperation clung to him like smoke. Tuppence noted it carefully. Later, Tuppence sought Lydia in the conservatory, where the girl tended wilting orchids with delicate hands. "You're fond of flowers," Tuppence observed gently. "They don't talk back," Lydia replied with a strained smile. Tuppence tilted her head. "Unlike people who whisper and accuse, tell me, Lydia, what do you inherit when your aunt passes?" Lydia froze, the watering can trembling in her grasp. "That is a cruel question." "But a necessary one," Tuppence said softly. "Alice knew something she wrote of in her diary. Did she ever speak to you?" Lydia's eyes flashed with sudden intensity. She was frightened, always frightened. She said she'd stumbled upon something that could ruin us all. I told her to keep quiet. I begged her, but she wouldn't listen. "And now she is dead," Tuppence murmured. "And the whispers point everywhere, even to you." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes. "I loved my aunt. I would never harm her by harming the girl. Believe that, Mrs. Beresford. Whatever Alice discovered, it was not mine to silence." Her words were earnest, yet fear underpinned them. Tuppence left her among the flowers, more uncertain than before. Reverend Cole received them in his small chamber, where prayer books lay stacked with almost military order. His eyes lifted, wary. "You pry too much," he said at once. "The Lord commands modesty, not gossip." Tommy sat down uninvited. "Funny thing about gossip, Reverend. Sometimes it turns out to be history. We heard whispers, an earlier scandal. Another maid, years ago, who vanished near your parish." Cole's face blanched. His fingers tightened on the Bible. "That was long ago. Lies, all of it. A wicked girl who ran away with a man, nothing more." "But you were implicated," Tuppence pressed gently. "Not proven, no, but mentioned. And now here you are, again in a house with a missing maid who turns up dead." Sweat glistened on his brow. "Coincidence, terrible coincidence. Do not tempt the wrath of heaven with such accusations." His voice shook, and when they left he sank into muttered prayer once more, but the shadow of guilt lingered around him like a shroud. Dr. Pemberton was the hardest to corner. They found him at last in Lady Havisham's room, packing away vials with meticulous care. "You fuss over her," Tuppence remarked, "as though she were porcelain." The doctor adjusted his spectacles. "Her nerves are delicate. She requires constant management." "Management or dependence?" Tommy asked. "Forging prescriptions can be lucrative, doctor, so long as the patient believes she cannot live without them." Dr. Pemberton stiffened. "That is a vile suggestion. My duty is to my patient." "And yet Alice wrote in her diary of seeing you here, late at night, with papers and money," Tuppence said softly. He turned sharply, colour rising in his cheeks. "She lied. Servants often do, to make themselves important. I did what was necessary for Lady Havisham's health, nothing more." But his hands trembled as he closed his bag, and his eyes flickered away too quickly. By evening, Tommy and Tuppence sat together once more in the drawing-room, firelight flickering across their thoughtful faces. "Well?" Tommy asked. "Each has a mask, each has a motive. Sir Reginald drowning in debts, Lydia poised to inherit, the Reverend with his shadowed past, and the doctor with his little habit of forgery. Any one of them could be guilty." "And yet none quite fits," Tuppence said. She turned the diary in her hands, eyes narrowed. "Except for this, the key under the stair. She repeats it 3 times. She meant it to be found." Tommy rose, stretching. "Shall we then?" They returned to the great hall. The house was hushed, most of the guests abed, only the tick of the clock and the sigh of wind breaking the silence. Tuppence lifted her candle, its flame trembling as though in anticipation. At the foot of the concealed staircase she knelt, fingers probing the worn boards. "Here," she murmured, "loose." With Tommy's help, a plank lifted, revealing a small recess beneath. Inside lay a silver key, tarnished but intact. Tuppence held it aloft. The key under the stair, the diary was right. Tommy examined it. "But what does it open?" Before she could answer, a gust of air extinguished the candle. Darkness swallowed them whole. Tuppence gasped. "Tommy!" But even as she spoke, she felt a sudden shove against her shoulder, strong and deliberate, sending her reeling toward the yawning staircase. Her foot slipped on the edge, balance teetering. Tommy's hand shot out, seizing her arm, dragging her back with a force that nearly toppled them both. They staggered into the wall, breathless, hearts pounding. From the darkness above came the sound of retreating footsteps, quick and purposeful, fading into silence. Tommy struck a match with shaking hands, relighting the candle. His face was grim. That was no accident. By the time Graves arrived with a lamp, the corridor above was empty. Our candle showed only retreating footprints blurred by dust. Tuppence straightened, pale but steady. No, someone tried to kill me, which means Tommy. That we are getting far too close, he finished. The candlelight trembled across the tapestry, casting long shadows that seemed to leer at them. The silver key glinted in Tuppence's hand, heavy with promise and peril. Somewhere in the house, the murderer watched, mask still in place, but the cracks were beginning to show. The attempt upon Tuppence's life left the house shaken, though she bore it with her usual mixture of indignation and resolve. Once Tommy had hauled her back from the brink of the staircase, she refused to rest, despite his urging. "I shall not be treated like a china doll, Tommy," she declared, cheeks flushed with the heat of determination. "If anything, this proves we are dangerously close to the truth, and that is precisely where I mean to be." Tommy looked at her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You'll be the death of me yet, Tuppence. But very well. If the murderer wants to silence you, then we'll give him reason to regret not pushing harder." The silver key still gleamed in Tuppence's hand, its weight strangely significant. They knelt again at the base of the staircase, Tommy testing the boards with careful pressure. At last, one step creaked with a hollow sound. "Here," he said, prying at the edge with his penknife. The wood lifted, revealing a narrow compartment carved into the stair itself. Dust lay thick inside, but nestled within it were two objects, another folded sheet of scorched paper, and a second, smaller silver key more delicate than the first. Tuppence lifted the paper with trembling fingers. The hand and scorched edge matched the diary. This was the missing final page. The handwriting was the maid's, jagged and hurried. "I have seen her. She is kept above, hidden away. The child of the late master, born in shame, concealed for fear of scandal. They would rather kill than let the world know. I fear for my life now. If I do not write again, remember this. The truth lies not in death, but in the living secret." Tuppence's breath caught. Tommy, an illegitimate child, the late Lord Haversham's, and all these years, hidden here, in this house. Tommy whistled low. "Then the sobbing you heard was no ghost. She lives, Tommy. She has lived here all this time." They stared at each other, the enormity of the revelation sinking in. Armed with the smaller key, they climbed again into the disused wing. The corridor loomed, shadows stretching long in the flickering candlelight. At the far end, near the room with the broken cradle, they found a locked door, newer than the rest. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow chamber, sparsely furnished. A bed, a table, a chair. The air smelled faintly of lavender and confinement. And on the bed sat a young woman, her hair dark and tangled, her eyes wide with fear. She rose quickly, backing into the corner. "Who are you? Did they send you?" Tuppence stepped forward gently, voice soft. "No, my dear. We are friends. We know you've been here, hidden. We heard you." The girl's lips trembled. "They told me never to speak, that the world would hate me if it knew." Tommy shook his head. "The world is cruel at times, but not so cruel as murder. And that is what has happened. The maid who cared for you, Alice, is dead." Tears filled the girl's eyes. She sank onto the bed, covering her face. "I told her not to write things down. I told her it would bring danger, and now she is gone." Tuppence sat beside her, taking her hand. "You are Lady Haversham's late husband's daughter, aren't you? That is why they hid you." The girl nodded faintly. "I never knew him, only that I was wrong, a secret to be kept." Tommy's jaw tightened. A secret someone killed for. Later that afternoon, Lydia sought them out in the library. She looked pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You found her," she said simply. Tuppence studied her. "You knew?" "Yes, Lydia's voice shook. "I discovered it months ago. I heard sounds above, followed them, and found her. My aunt begged me not to speak. She said the scandal would destroy us all, and I agreed to help keep the secret." "And Reverend Cole?" Tommy asked. Lydia hesitated. "He advised us. He said concealment was mercy, that if the truth were revealed, my aunt would collapse under the shame. He brought food at times, prayed with her. He promised it was God's will to keep silence." "Convenient for him," Tuppence said sharply. "And when Alice discovered it?" Lydia's composure cracked. "She threatened to tell. She said she had written everything down. We begged her to stop, but then she vanished. I swear I thought she had run away." "You didn't kill her?" Tommy pressed. "No," Lydia cried. "I would never. But I concealed the truth, and for that, perhaps I am guilty in another way." Tuppence's gaze softened, though her suspicion did not fade. "The truth cannot stay hidden forever, Lydia, not when lives are at stake." By evening, the atmosphere in Greystone had grown unbearable. The truth pressed against the walls, demanding release. Tommy and Tuppence agreed. The time had come for confrontation. They asked Lady Havisham, frail in her chair, to gather the household in the drawing-room. Inspector Miles waited in the anteroom at our request, within earshot, until we called him. The great chamber glowed with firelight, the storm-muted world beyond its windows sinking into dusk. Shadows crowded the corners, as though eager to listen. The company assembled, Sir Reginald with a scowl, Lydia pale but determined, Reverend Cole clutching his Bible, Dr. Pemberton stiff and wary. The servants lingered at the edges, wide-eyed. Lady Havisham's voice trembled. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, you say you have something to tell us. Speak it now." Tuppence rose, diary in hand. Her voice carried, clear and steady. "We have discovered the truth Alice wrote of in her diary. She found a secret in this house, one so dangerous she feared for her life. The secret was this, that Lord Havisham fathered a child outside his marriage. That child was brought here, hidden from the world, kept in these rooms, and she has been here all along." A gasp rippled through the room. Sir Reginald muttered a curse. Reverend Cole crossed himself violently. Dr. Pemberton's jaw tightened. Lydia closed her eyes. Lady Havisham covered her face with trembling hands. "I tried to protect her. She is innocent. It was my husband's sin, not hers. I could not cast her out to scorn, so I kept her here. Lydia discovered the truth, and she helped me. We thought no one else knew, until Alice." "And Alice," Tommy said grimly, "wrote it down. She meant to keep it as her protection, but someone feared that her words would be found, and so she was silenced." Sir Reginald sprang to his feet. "This is madness. A bastard child skulking in the attic, and you all conspiring to hide her. No wonder the girl threatened blackmail. I'd have paid her to hold her tongue gladly. But murder? Not my style." Reverend Cole's voice rose in protest. "I counselled secrecy only for mercy's sake. God does not sanction murder. Do not lay that sin at my door." Dr. Pemberton adjusted his spectacles with shaking fingers. "If Alice suspected me of forgery, it was dangerous enough. But this! I had no wish to know of illegitimate children or family scandals. My duty was to Lady Havisham alone." Lydia rose, her face pale but resolute. "I admit it. I found her. I helped conceal her. Reverend Cole guided me. But I did not kill Alice. I could not." The room fell into silence, the fire snapping in the grate. Each face was marked by fear, denial, and guilt. Tuppence lifted the torn page, the last fragment of Alice's diary. The missing page was hidden beneath the stair with the key. She wrote plainly, "They would rather kill than let the world know. I fear for my life now." That fear was justified. The question is, who acted upon it? Her eyes swept the room. Sir Reginald shifted uneasily. Cole muttered prayers, Pemberton's lips pressed tight. Lydia trembled. Lady Havisham wept softly, her frailty laid bare. Tommy's voice cut through. "The truth cannot stay hidden much longer. We know the secret. Now we must know the murderer." As the firelight flickered, suspicion hung like smoke in the air. The silver key gleamed on the table, the diary lay open, and the hidden girl waited upstairs, living proof of all that had been concealed. But Alice was dead, and her killer still walked free within these walls. Tuppence folded her hands, her gaze sharp. We will have our answers. If not now, then soon. And the murderer will find that secrets, however carefully hidden, have a way of unlocking themselves. The room shivered in silence, as though the very stones of Greystone awaited the final revelation. The drawing room of Greystone Manor had the air of a courtroom that night. The storm had abated, but a different thunder rolled through the house, the thunder of secrets dragged into the light. Firelight flickered across anxious faces, shadows dancing on the oak-panelled walls. Sir Reginald sat with his brandy clenched tight, jaw thrust forward in defiance. Lydia perched near her aunt, pale as paper, her embroidery long forgotten in her lap. Reverend Cole clutched his Bible like a shield, lips moving in silent prayer. Lady Havisham herself leaned back in her chair, her frailty magnified by the ordeal, though her eyes were sharp with dread. Dr. Pemberton stood apart, arms folded, spectacles glinting in the fire's glow, and before them all, Tommy and Tuppence stood like prosecutors at the bar, the maid's diary and the silver key upon the table before them. "It is time for truth," Tuppence began, her voice calm but resonant. "Alice did not run away. She was murdered, her body hidden in this house. Each of you had reason to fear her words, for she knew too much. Tonight, we shall unmask her killer." A ripple of tension swept the room. Sir Reginald muttered something about melodrama, but no one laughed. Tommy stepped forward, his tone brisk. "We have examined your stories, your alibis, your motives, and though each of you has much to answer for, only one of you had both the opportunity and the desperation to kill." He gestured to the diary. Alice wrote of quarrels, of money, of shameful secrets. She wrote of the key under the stair, and thanks to her we have found that key and the final missing page. Tuppence held up the scorched paper. She discovered the hidden child. Lady Havisham's late husband left behind an illegitimate daughter, concealed in these rooms for years. Out of guilt and fear of scandal, Lady Havisham kept her safe, and Lydia helped her. That was the secret Alice stumbled upon, but she also learned something else, something worth killing for. "Let us begin with you, Sir Reginald," Tommy said, turning toward the baronet. "You are drowning in debts. You demanded money from Lady Havisham, and Alice may have overheard you. Blackmail would not have been beneath you." Sir Reginald flushed, his fist slamming onto the armrest. "Yes, I owe. I'd mortgage my soul to pay the bookmakers, but murder a girl? Blast it, Beresford, I may be a fool, but I'm no butcher." Tuppence's eyes lingered on him a moment longer. "Your desperation condemns you morally, Sir Reginald, but not fatally. For on the night Alice vanished, your debts could not be silenced with her death. You had everything to gain by bribing her, not killing her." He sagged with relief, though anger still smouldered in his eyes. Tuppence turned next to Lydia, who stiffened under the scrutiny. "You, Lydia, stand to inherit, and you confessed to discovering the hidden girl. You feared for your aunt, and you concealed the truth. Alice threatened exposure. Your motive was clear enough." Lydia's lips trembled. "I told you, I begged her to keep silent. But I did not kill her. I could not." Lady Havisham's thin hand reached for her niece's. "She speaks the truth. Lydia has been my strength, not my ruin." Tuppence inclined her head. "Yes, you both kept the secret. That guilt is yours, but not Alice's death." Reverend Cole stirred uneasily as Tommy turned to him. "And you, Reverend. A scandal years ago. Another maid vanished under your parish. Alice wrote of seeing you near the staircase, though you swore never to enter the wing. You counselled concealment, told Lydia it was God's will. Was it also God's will to kill?" Cole's voice quavered. "I prayed for silence, yes. I believed exposure would break Lady Havisham's soul, but murder? No, that is sin beyond forgiveness." His eyes were wide with fear, his fingers white upon the Bible. Yet his terror seemed rooted more in conscience than in guilt. At last, Tuppence's gaze settled on Dr. Pemberton. Her voice grew sharper. "And then there is you, Doctor. Alice wrote of you most often. She saw you come late at night, carrying papers. She suspected money changing hands. She hinted at forgery, and she feared you above all." Pemberton straightened, his expression icy. "I am a physician. My concern was Lady Havisham's health." "Or her dependents," Tommy said grimly. "You forged prescriptions. You kept her fragile, ensuring she needed your care. Alice discovered it. She wrote it here. He tapped the diary. And for that, you silenced her. The doctor's lips tightened. Preposterous. You have no proof. Don't we? Tuppence lifted the silver key. This key does not only unlock the hidden chamber, it also opens a certain desk in your room. We tried it this afternoon with Lady Havisham's permission. Inside, we found your ledger. She laid a small black book upon the table. It records the forged prescriptions, the payments you extracted, the manipulation of a frail woman's health. Alice saw you with it. She threatened exposure, and so you killed her, dragged her body to the disused wing, hoping the family secret would mask your crime. Dr. Pemberton's composure wavered at last. His face blanched, his breath quickened. You trespassed, you had no right. Tommy's voice rang out. We had every right when a murderer walks free. You killed Alice to protect your scheme, and you used Lady Havisham's guilt over her husband's child to keep her cowed and silent. The doctor's eyes darted about the room, seeking an ally, but found only condemnation. Lydia recoiled, Sir Reginald swore. Reverend Cole muttered a prayer, and Lady Havisham covered her face in despair. At last, his shoulders sagged. His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. She would have ruined me. A servant girl. I gave my life to medicine, and she would have destroyed it all with her prying pen. I only meant to frighten her, but she struggled. It was an accident. Accident? Tuppence's eyes flashed. You left her body hidden in filth. You let suspicion fall on others. You nearly killed me on the staircase last night. Pemberton's silence was damning. The door opened. Inspector Miles, who had been waiting nearby, stepped forward with constables. His face was grim. Dr. Jonathan Pemberton, you are under arrest for the murder of Alice Carter. Anything you say— Pemberton lunged toward the table, perhaps for the ledger, perhaps for the fire poker at its side. But the constables seized him, wrenching his arms behind his back. His spectacles slipped, clattering to the floor. He struggled once, twice, then sagged in defeat. His mask of professional dignity shattered. Lady Havisham wept quietly. Lydia held her, trembling. Sir Reginald poured another drink with shaking hands. Reverend Cole murmured prayers of forgiveness, though his eyes were full of horror. Tommy slipped an arm around Tuppence. Well, partner, another villain unmasked. She leaned against him, weary but resolute. Yes, but some truths cut deeper than any crime. The poor girl upstairs, the hidden daughter, what of her? At Tuppence's request, Graves the butler fetched the young woman from her chamber. She entered hesitantly, eyes wide, dark hair falling about her shoulders. The household gasped to see her, living proof of all that had been concealed. Lady Havisham stretched out her trembling hands. My child, not by blood, but by duty. Forgive me, my dear, for the years in shadows. The girl faltered, then allowed herself to be drawn into her aunt's embrace. Tears flowed freely, grief mingling with relief. She shall live in the light now, Tuppence said softly. No more secrets, no more chains. Later, as the constables led Pemberton away and the household dispersed in exhaustion, Tommy and Tuppence lingered by the dying fire. In the corridor, servants whispered that Mrs. Finch had warned them all along about doors best left shut. Tommy poured 2 small glasses of brandy, handing one to his wife. To the end of another case, Tuppence, though I must say I'd prefer a seaside holiday next time. She smiled faintly. You always say that. And yet here we are, drenched in storm and scandal. Tommy lifted his glass. To Alice, then. Her courage in writing saved us all. And to the girl upstairs, Tuppence added softly, may she find a life beyond the staircase. They clinked glasses, the fire crackled low, and the shadows deepened around them. Greystone Manor, at last, had yielded its secrets. The storm had blown itself out. By morning, the sky above Greystone Manor was pale blue, streaked with thin white clouds, as though the heavens themselves had scrubbed away the night's violence. The house, too, seemed quieter, its very stones weary after surrendering their secrets. Tommy and Tuppence took breakfast in the smaller morning room, where the windows looked out over rain-damp lawns. The fire had burned low, but a single log still crackled, a final echo of warmth in the chill air. Tommy buttered a slice of toast with exaggerated care, then pushed the plate toward Tuppence. You must eat, old thing. Detectives can't live on revelations alone. Tuppence smiled faintly, though the weariness in her eyes betrayed her. Strange, isn't it? A house that looked so still from the outside was carrying the weight of so much grief. It feels different now. Lighter, perhaps. Or perhaps only emptier. Later that morning, they were summoned to Lady Havisham's chamber. She sat propped against pillows, her frailty more apparent than ever. Lydia hovered near, watchful and tender, while Graves the butler moved silently about, as though guarding what dignity his mistress still possessed. Lady Havisham's hand trembled as she extended it toward Tuppence. "You have done what I could not. You faced the truth. For that, I thank you." Tuppence clasped her hand gently. "The truth is seldom easy, my lady, but without it, none of us can breathe." Lady Havisham's eyes filled with tears. "For years I carried my husband's sin as though it were my own. I thought hiding the child was mercy, but it was fear. And that fear bred silence, and silence bred death. If I had trusted the world a little more, Alice might yet live." Tommy spoke softly. "You cannot carry all the blame. The true guilt lies with the man who killed to protect his greed, but you can choose what happens next." Lady Havisham's gaze turned to Lydia. "I leave it to her now. My strength is gone, but she may yet build something honest from what remains." Lydia pressed her aunt's hand, her face pale but resolute. "I will try, Aunt. I promise." The day saw each of the household marked by their own reckonings. Lydia moved through the house with quiet determination, speaking more freely with the servants, her eyes no longer veiled by secrets. She avoided Tuppence's gaze at times, but when they met there was no hostility, only a kind of shy gratitude. Sir Reginald was less composed. He stomped about, muttering darkly of ruined fortunes and bad luck. But for all his bluster, he made no attempt to leave, perhaps recognizing that creditors awaited him outside these walls. Tommy observed him wryly. "There's a man who'll never learn until the last shilling is gone. Still, at least murder is not on his conscience." Reverend Cole retreated into himself. His sermons ceased. His prayers were whispered behind closed doors. When he passed through the hall, the servants looked away. His influence, once heavy, had withered overnight. Tuppence remarked quietly to Tommy, "He'll never recover from the knowledge that his piety became a cloak for cowardice. That is punishment enough." And what of the girl? She was no longer hidden. Under the care of the constables and a sympathetic matron from the village, she was led from the shuttered rooms into the open air. The pale light fell across her face as though for the first time, and she blinked like one unused to brightness. Lady Havisham watched her go with silent tears, while Lydia stood stiffly, her lips pressed tight. Tuppence's heart ached at the sight. "She will be cared for now," Tommy said softly. "No longer a secret, no longer a shadow." Tuppence nodded. "But always a reminder of what fear can do, of what silence costs." By afternoon, the Beresfords prepared to depart. Their suitcases, somewhat the worse for their unexpected stay, were brought down to the hall. Graves supervised with his usual grave efficiency, though when he handed Tuppence her gloves, there was the faintest glimmer of respect in his eyes. Tommy looked about the hall, its tapestries and portraits restored to stillness. "Well, old thing, we've survived another brush with melodrama. Do you suppose we'll ever manage a holiday without corpses cropping up?" Tuppence laughed, though the sound was weary. "Perhaps, but somehow I doubt it. Adventure seems to find us, Tommy, whether we asked for it or not." He offered his arm with mock solemnity. "Then let us hope adventure continues to prefer someone else's drawing room to our own." Before they left, Tuppence turned once more to the great tapestry. It hung silent, the secret behind it no longer a mystery but a wound. She lifted the edge, revealing the narrow staircase. The air was still, carrying only dust and memory. No sobbing now, no hidden footsteps, only silence. Tommy came to stand beside her. "Well, the staircase has given up all it had to hide. It can rest in peace now." Tuppence let the tapestry fall back into place. "Yes, secrets rot in the dark, Tommy, but once the light finds them, they can no longer harm." Lady Havisham insisted upon a final farewell, though she was too frail to rise from her chair. "You have my blessing," she said softly. You brought justice, though at a heavy cost. If peace comes to this house again, it will be because of you." Tommy bowed slightly. "We only did what anyone should do, Lady Havisham, but we're glad if we've helped." Tuppence kissed the old woman's cheek. "Rest now. The burden is no longer yours to carry." And with that, they stepped out into the crisp air, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. The manor loomed behind them, solemn and scarred, yet perhaps also unburdened at last. As their motor car rattled away from Greystone, the countryside opening before them in shades of green and gold, Tommy glanced at his wife. "You know," he mused, "for all the trouble, there's a certain satisfaction in seeing justice done, even if it does leave one longing for a quiet tea and a crossword." Tuppence smiled, watching the fields roll past. "Curiosity is dangerous, Tommy. It can uncover things better left buried. But without it, Alice would still be only a whisper, the girl upstairs a phantom, and a murderer free. Curiosity may be perilous, but it brings justice too." He reached across, squeezing her hand. "Well said, Mrs. Beresford, though next time I insist on a mystery involving sun loungers and cocktails." She laughed softly. "We'll see, darling, but somehow I suspect England has other plans for us." The road stretched ahead, winding through autumn hedgerows. Behind them, Greystone Manor receded into the distance, its staircase once a place of secrets, now nothing more than stone and dust. Silent, yes, but no longer hiding. And so the Beresfords drove on, hand in hand, into the promise of whatever mystery awaited them next.